This book is conceived to be an introduction to the understanding of the customs nomenclature, of when its task is to develop a method to apprehend it. It is the question of introduced to its interpretive rules and principle by bringing them back to their foundation. Two main ideas are exposed. This foundation places at the starting point the existence of an universal unit to identify all goods. We deny it. This negation is justified by the impossibility of building on this unit a system of consistent classification. In this sense, the recasting that we operate proceeds from its criticism. Introduction. The customs nomenclature is presented as a list including 311 groups of goods with 4-digit numerical code terminate by 2 zeros, and 930 groups divided into 4,708 subheading with 6-digit numerical code. A total of 5,019 tariffers lines with 6-digit numerical code that represent the species of goods object of the international trade. Determination. The ranking of goods in this structure is virtually identical with the determination of their species. But, the classification in terms of this simple category is breathless to determine all entities by which can be expressed. Thus, in the same way that the linear dimensions will not all themselves to be measured solely by the meter, the goods are not identifying only by the species. The species is not considered as an entity nowed and classified. 1. The absence of a concept of the species. The species of commodities is defined as the name which is allocated to them by the nomenclature. This definition vehicle in the language of the nomenclature as in the current language ambiguity. The word species recovers at the time several entities quite different and is synonymous with them. We will cite two examples. The first concerns the confusion of the species with one of its extension, the second its confusion with one of its subdivisions. 1.1. The species overlaps with the kind. The nomenclature uses the same name to designate both a species than a group of species. It considers that the name horses attributed to circus horses is their species, that's to say, that designate a group of horses of a particular destination, and supports by the same opportunity that this name is sufficient to cover all horses regardless of their destination. However, in the relation to horses of particular destination, horses of any destinations is the kind because their uses can be other than that of horses of a particular use, which is only a species of horses. By taking the kind for the species, the nomenclature classifies circus horses under the heading circus, which is not a kind of horses. 1.2. The species overlaps with its subdivisions. The nomenclature uses the same name to designate both a species than a subdivision of the species. It considers the name oil pumps for engines attributed to oil pumps of engines for automotive vehicle as their species. However, the species is composed of a kind, pumps, and a specific epithet, oil. This name accounts therefore a specific character additional, for engines, which in fact the first subdivision of the species. Ignoring the first subdivision of the species, the nomenclature automatically ignores the second subdivision, oil pumps of engines for automotive vehicle, contained in the motor vehicle engine parts group. The nomenclature maintains the confusion due to this terminological imprecision. Yet, the species is like the meter or the gram, it is a basic unit that admits multiples and sub-multiples. 2. The species as taxonomic concept. Seeing the terms of the nomenclature, we find that it is entities named and classified. The species is the basic unit. Its other level are, on the one hand the group which reproduce it in a greater extensions, kind, family, class, and on the other hand its subdivisions, first subdivision, second subdivision. The classification is done according to the progression and the hierarchical order from the smallest taxonomic unit to the largest. 2.1. Classification of circus horses. Circus horses are recognizable by their class, mammals, by their kind, horses, and by the group, traveling circus, which is not a taxonomic unit but a grouping of goods rationally adapted to the function to be performed, that's to say a functional unit. Their classification is done following the progress and the hierarchical order from the smallest taxonomic unit to the largest, i.e. under the heading horses. The class of mammals does not contain circus horses because the taxonomic entities are entities distributed according to a gradation going by progression of decreasing meaning, class, family, kind, species, first subdivision of the species, second subdivision of the species. The following table shows the relationship between the different units, and its use helps to classify the circus horses by appropriate unit. Units used in the species extensions. Point 2.2. Classification of oil pumps of engines for automotive vehicle. In the nomenclature, the oil pumps of engines for automotive vehicles are recognizable by the first subdivision of the species oil pumps of engines, and by the second subdivision oil pumps of engines for automotive vehicle present in parts of engines for automotive vehicles, which is not a taxonomic unit but a group of several parts not specified in the lines of the nomenclature. The second subdivision oil pumps for engines of automotive vehicles have priority over the first subdivision oil pumps of engines. The following table shows the relationship between these different units, and its use help to classify the oil pumps of engines for automotive vehicles by appropriate unit. Units used in the species subdivisions. We must return to this notion of unsolicited species to inform that it is not reduced to the name assigned to the goods by the nomenclature. The species is much more than a name allocated by the nomenclature, it's a quirk. Point 3. Species is a quirk. The species is a quirk because it leads several lives. This is the name attributed to the goods by the nomenclature, but also the one that refers to their function, or the one that refers main functions when engaged in several, or this is the species of goods more similar to those that cannot be classified under their name. 3.1. The species of goods as linguistic signs designating their function. The nomenclature considers linguistic signs that designate the function of the machines should have priority in the ranking of those designating the industry that uses them. From this point of view, sewing machines show signs more obvious and gives clear description in respect to the sewing machines for closing bags than machines to close the bags. The evidence of this proposal does not seem necessary as it appears as a truth of common sense. The ignorance of taxonomic units prevents to be submitted. But, the classification of the sewing machines to close the bags cannot be deprived of this scientific support, because they are perceptible only to the extent that they are represented intellectually, because of their wrap in particular grouping of products. The table below shows the relationship that exists between the two names, and its use helps to classify the sewing machines for closing the bags under the appropriate unit, taxonomic units that expresses the sewing machines. For closing the bags, Point 3.2. The species of goods to multiple function like linguistic signs designating their main function. The nomenclature does not cover all the goods in a formal manner. It refers often to the specific articles, receivers of satellite dishes, positioner of satellite dishes, or to the pure substances, sheets in plastic, aluminum foil. To specify these combinations in the nomenclature, we would have an infinity number of tariff lines. As well, without being formally designated, these goods are deduced from their parts expressed. The approach is to determine the component that provides the main function, and to classify the whole as if it consisted only of this component. A. Example of the receiver which incorporates a positioner. This is a handset which ensures mobility and modulation of electromagnetic waves. The two components participate in the realization of a single function: the reception of television programs by satellite. So there is no main function and secondary function. This complex should be classified under the heading which designates this single function. But, as the nomenclature does not provide for such a function, it must be classified under the heading which expressly designates this equipment, the grouping of elements used in conjunction with satellite dishes. Taxonomic unit that expresses receivers and positioner. For satellite dishes. B. Example of the laminate, printed packing film. This laminate is made of layers of plastic materials and in aluminum which ensure respectively and concurrently the protection dry yeast against oxygen and against the light. Regarding complementary components whose function performed by the assembly is not expressly specified in the nomenclature, the function to be considered as essential is that provided by the component the more developed, is to say the one placed the last by order numbering. The goods appearing in the nomenclature in a progressive order to indicate their degree of finish and complexity. By the table. Basic unit. Species. (3.3). The species of the goods is the species of the goods more similar. The goods which cannot be classified under their linguistic signs are classified in the heading appropriate to the goods more similar. It is required to compare with similar goods, in order to determine the goods the most similar to the goods presented. The nomenclature made clear that the analogy can be based on several items without expressly tell. It cites 3. The name, the character and the use. This principle leaves a pure innuendo and its border is flowing. As well, the analogy is established between the receiver of satellite dishes which receives electromagnetic waves carriers of the image, and the receiver of the image, TV. Similarly, it is established between the positioner of satellite dishes which ensures the conversion of the output voltage and current as well as the polarity, and the static converter that ensures only the conversion of the output voltage and current. Yet receivers and positioners are species covered by the group of elements used in conjunction with parabolic reflectors. The table below helps to express these devices by the appropriate taxonomic unit. Basic unit. Species. Conclusion. We must question the terms of the heading or subheading not as linguistic signs to recognize the goods, but as they designate taxonomic entities organically linked and distributed in a graduation from a progression of decreasing. References. Classification of the horses. Explain notes of the Rule N Degree 1, Classification of oil pumps for engines for automotive vehicles. Paragraph 4 Section 16 of Explain Notes. Classification the receivers of satellite dishes. Compendium of Classification Opinions of the OMD for 2002. Classification the positioned of satellite dishes. Decision of Classification of the Customs House N Degree 2001 230 seconds for 2002. Classification of the laminate for the packaging of the dry yeast called printed packing film. Circular of Customs House N Degree 5507 230 seconds February 4, 2015.